Those are great examples. And then on top of that, we have the emotional changes of growing older, including puberty. How does that make it even more challenging to identify and address anxiety disorders?
Sure. We know that the adolescent period is fraught with a lot of changes, just as you said. Both with body and mind, but also in growing kind of independence and hopefully growing mastery. These are can be vulnerable stages when kids are a little bit more aware of peers and maybe how they fit or don't fit within whatever that culture or milieu is. And so we know that for kids who already come into the world with a little bit more, apprehension, that fight or flight response is a little bit more highly tuned, maybe than the average kiddo, that they can really have a hard time during this stage. And when you think about, all the many ways that kids are kind of looking at themselves, in the mirror, maybe kind of judging themselves or judging their appearance. I related to one teenager recently that even our email addresses have icons of ourselves, and so that we're looking at, and it's not a deep reflection, but it's another opportunity for us to kind of judge our appearance and the way we present ourselves. And so all of these things can be crazy making for our young people.
So, crazy making, that's a good description. So, if a parent is faced with a child who is crazy making, how can they teach that child how to understand, allow, and address those painful emotions that they might experience every day?
Sure. One is being aware and just recognizing the pattern. So if we see our children getting into a pattern of, every time it's time to go to school or to go to a particular practice, and suddenly there's the stomach aches, suddenly there's the headaches, helping them to identify and have a vocabulary to describe. Maybe this isn't just a headache for a headache's sake, but maybe this is my body or my brain relating some emotion to me as well. And I think often labeling and being able to name things helps our children to be able to conquer them a little bit more readily. The other is, I think, modeling for our kids. So it's not uncommon that we as parents also struggle, even if it's not to the same extent that our children do, with some of the things that they might be prone to. And so I think the times that we can talk about, wow, that was really stressful. What helped me through? I made time for my meditation and prayer this morning, and that really made a difference. Or getting outside and doing some exercise. And then the third part, which sounds cliche and perhaps passe, is the dinner table and meal times together. I think there are some missed moments of talking about emotionally what's going on with our kids, and there's a greater chance to catch what it is that they might be struggling with by what they describe and what they're saying to us.
That's good practical advice. And we know that despite the COVID pandemic, or that anxiety disorders have been increasing worldwide. What's behind that, Larry?
Yeah, I think there are probably a couple of things at play too that are leading to some of that apprehension. And the truth is, we don't have full knowledge yet. I think that's a subject of ongoing study and inquiry too, to figure out some of those things. But at least some of the common themes that I see in the clinic. One is the isolation, that I think we know that we're built for community, and that we're wired for people and communities of love. And so that was one of the primary things that our kids have been struggling with throughout this year. And even though they've been able to re-engage in many parts of the country and maybe parts of the world to do that again, there really is something of a deficit too, just in that time when they weren't able to connect. The other thing is, as much as we pay attention to the peer connections, there really is a strong forming element from having many adults in your life too, who are able to speak into helping you to feel more confident. So when the art teacher, tells you how well that you did, or the wrestling coach, gives you high praise for what you're able to do, all those little pieces add up to people's, and especially our young people, their feeling of mastery and self-confidence. And so I think we're still catching up in a lot of those things that our children weren't engaged in, that were bulwarks, that were helpful pillars for helping them to cope.
But even before the pandemic, anxiety was increasing in children. What might be some of the other causes?
Sure. The other things that we know are also the is attachment is the word I'm going to use for it, and part of it is our tech saturated time, and of course I am aware that I'm saying this as we're speaking and are blessed by the technology that's allowing us to connect. But I think what we're recognizing, and more parents are recognizing, is that there's a superficial connection that comes from our digital connections. That it's not like the mighty oak, which is rooted in the ground and has extensive root systems that, in the face of high winds and storming rains, will withstand being shaken. Instead, we see kids who are maybe more peer oriented. So if you take the TikToks, the Snapchats, the all of those things, some kids, their sense of themselves are actually correlate with the number of likes that they get or the number of shares of the videos that they've posted. And so I think we have maybe unknowingly kind of turned our kids towards each other, which is wonderful in a limited sense. But really, we want them oriented towards adults because adults help them set the future, help them to develop the skills that they'll need to kind of push forward as well. And so I think the things that our kids have been attaching to as their primary supports have also made it harder to recover during this time.
That's some great insight, Larry. Let's turn to treatment. It seems, from what I've learned, that the most effective and long lasting treatment for anxiety disorders teaches patients how to develop healthier thought patterns through what's called cognitive behavioral therapy. What would you like parents to know about that?
The great thing is that cognitive behavioral therapy and the types of therapy we use for anxiety are really, really effective at helping our kids to do well. And so they often allow our children to be scientists in some ways, so they can look at their thoughts, their feelings, their behaviors, and how those things interact, and can stop the behaviors that might push that cycle of thought that gets them in those stuck situations or stuck habits. And so I think these are really mighty things. What's also remarkable is that when you look at the functional MRI studies, I mean, the changes in the brain that we see from kids who learn these skills are enduring. They, in many cases, or in some studies, they actually last longer than medication interventions too. And so these are really potent things that I want parents to feel encouraged and empowered to take advantage of. That if your doctor or friend is recommending that your child might benefit from these types of therapies, it's worth giving it a look because it really can be impactful for children.